Can we start? Yeah, fantastic. We're getting started just a little bit late, but that should in no way detract from what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm Olga Oliker. I'm in the very odd position of being representative of the International Crisis Group, introducing at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace a fellow of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Alexander Baunov from their Berlin Center. Alexander is he used to be a Russian diplomat. He was for a long time a journalist. He is one of the most astute commentators of the situation in Russia and around it, which has gotten him the joy of being a foreign agent, according to the Russian government. He's also a best-selling author of a book called The End of the Regime, which is not about the end of the Russian regime, or even the Soviet regime, and is a historical analysis. But what we're talking about today is Russians and what they think. Which is always an interesting question, right? If you look at the polling data, and I think we have that here, we have something here. It tells us that everybody loves Putin, and they love him more and more with each passing moment. It tells me that people support peace talks. It tells me, yeah, you can talk us through all of these.
Of this data.
I'm
not a sociologist in the sense that I cannot scientifically interpret. It's not the only data I have in mind when I'm thinking about how to assess the mood inside the country. I have in mind also some unpublished data of my fellow sociologists, friends, scholars, and different independent outlets, sociological outlets that have new data that have not yet been published, and that give us the
more contradictions.
Yes, the more to understand better the new trends. And indeed, if you see at the graphs that show us the approval, of both Vladimir Putin and like this one, you see how abruptly is rocketed up after the beginning of the war. Yeah, and we see how it's done. The non-approval, disapproval of Vladimir Putin's rating went down after the beginning of the war, and then it increases slowly, and the disapproval decreases the same slowly. But basically, it's not flat in the strictly scientific sense of the word. That's quite fresh data, and it shows. That the war basically helped Vladimir Putin to be popular. More important and more tricky is the indicator that shows us the satisfaction with the direction to which the country is going, to which the country is developing, which again shows the same rise in after the war, and then slow gradual rise in the recent years, of course, with some fluctuations. And this indicator is totally matching the two other indicators. One is answering the question of general satisfaction of the life, which is higher, and maybe at this highest point in Russia, after beginning of this century, not to mention the 90s. And at some surveys, it comes up to 89%. So even higher than Putin's latest electoral result, which was not quite electoral, as you understand, because it was electoral legitimation in the framework of an autocracy. It's not basically an elected leader. It's either legitimized by electoral procedure, which is not the same, and any political scientist will confirm that it's not the same. And then the other indicator is whether, how do you assess, are you living in your time, your time into the past, and your time is in the future. And it's the indicator and the amount of the people that answers that they are living in their time was rising, and it's maybe for the first time in many years, more than 50%. Although the number of the people who are saying that their time is in the past is decreasing, it's still significant, more than 20%, and my time is in the future, it's about 18%. So 50-something, 52, 53 are answering that they are living exactly in time. This is my time. And all these, I remind you, coincides with the war, which is a surprising result. More surprising, if you go from the numbers that Levada usually gives, but not only, to the focus groups and deep interviews, or analyzing the data from the social media, from the chats, like chats of the schools, for instance, when the parents are discussing things concerning the school, or chat of blogs in the cities, or in WhatsApp, for instance, or just chats of colleagues in a corporative environment, we see that all this satisfaction, rise of satisfaction, is not exactly about the support of the war, as the, well, hostilities, bombings, occupation of the territory, but it's about something that is generated around the war and by the war, has connection to the war, but basically could exist without the war. And this is, on the first place, the resilience of the Russian economy and the social resilience. The most important point people stress when being asked in deeper interviews about how they feel and about how they assess the situation, they are insisting that we are, as a country, despite the war, despite the sanctions, despite the, well, brands that went out from the market, despite the repressions for those who are aware of repressions, because repressions are not very much advertised by the Russian mass media, at least the media addressed to the general public. They are satisfied with the fact that the country continues to develop infrastructurally, well, that there is some substitution of imports, and it's going on quite successfully in several areas, that the pressure from outside, both military and economic, didn't deliver the result everybody was afraid of. We are continuing to live a normal life, even concerning those who left the country. I mean, many stars of music, theater, cinema, science have left the country, and the people are insisting that despite this fact, we are continuing to have rich cultural life, full market, no shortage in anything. Domestic tourism is not worse than traveling to Europe, because Russia is big and rich. There are so many places to see inside Russia, but Russia is not isolated, if you remember, from the countries of the global south. And all this is not about exactly the war, but it's not connected to the war at all. It could be type of answer given without any war, or it is connected with the war, but not directly, in the sense that the war was, those who dare to say this, maybe not very, very just and good decision, but it helped to discover, to promote some things that we had to do without the war, like more self-sufficiency in the economy, more technological development, more industrial development. You remember that the industrial, the number of industrial growth are much in advance compared to the general economic growth. So more self-sufficiency, more economic independence, more technological competition with the West, even more, social awareness, more social solidarity, less indifference between the fellow citizens. All this is somehow connected to the fact that the country is in war, is in an extreme tension as any belligerent country, but still not directly connected to the approval of the hostilities, bombings, and occupation. And this is the new mood that my friends, sociologists, maybe they are going to laboratory of public sociology that makes this in-depth interview, and the crossing evidence are from two different sources about this new phenomenon, explored, studied by this laboratory of public sociology in cooperation with some Western institutions. The laboratory, by the way, is foreign agent too. It's important to mention when you are in Russian language environment, not for us, just indicating that that the Russian state are going after the scientists, not only public figures like journalists or political activists. And then there was a thesis of another my friend who was studying, newly emerged doctor of political science and social science in the European University in Florence, who was studying 30,000 group of schools in mostly provincial Russia, how people are reacting. His name is Ivan Fomichov, by the way, just to mention the scientist who brought me the data, not published yet, and how people react to the fact of casualties when they become aware of casualties, how it affects their support of the war, power, government, and Russia as the country. And we see the correlation is not direct. The correlation is this. When another news of another casualty comes to a small community, like a village or small town in Russian provinces, and the most of contractor soldiers and mobilized soldiers are from these parts of the country, so poorer parts of the countries, the reaction is like crossing, it's dual or ambivalent, I would say, from it decrease the trust to the authorities, to the president, to the government, but it increase the patriotism, the patriotic feeling, with the way that so reactions in the form of likes in the chats after the information, after the patriotic content that mention the president or the government are much less compared to the likes and positive reactions that don't mention president or the official structures. So people are more supportive of patriotic, let's say, discourses, patriotic narratives, when these patriotic narratives don't mention President Putin or official structures.
So can I jump in? I mean, I think you're getting to some of this, but why are we talking about this? I mean, we're talking about a country where information is tightly controlled. where a lot of effort goes into ensuring that people are happy with their government, even when their government is waging a war. The government certainly cares about public opinion, but they seem to feel they've cracked the code on keeping public opinion positive, and everything you say suggests that they are. So the only thing are we learning anything that's useful to us other than from an academic standpoint from discussing what Russians think?
It's important for basically two reasons. We see that, the development of Russian society is helpful to understand how it can affect the behavior of the authorities. Of course, it's not directly affected.
Can it at all affect? Can it at all affect the behavior of authorities?
Well, certainly yes.
How?
Somehow yes. We can go to this subject later. But what is important that during these years, let's say, there is a phenomenon of horizontal pressure in the sense that it's not only the repressive pressure from above, from the law and order bodies of the Russian autocracy, but the horizontal pressure is to be not in confrontation with the people you are surrounded by, your colleagues in your workplace, your family members, your whatever, your neighbors, your manicure master, if you are using the service. And in the first reaction was, I mean, in 2022 and 2023, which were the critical years for the relations between the society and the regime, and for the relations between different groups, different bearers of different opinions inside the Russian society. So supporters of the war, militarists, and opponents of the war, pacifists, let's say, those who support more autocracy, more dictatorial methods of running the country, or less dictatorial meanings, more liberal, more pluralist methods of running the country. The confrontation is very, very tense in the very first months and years of the war. And then what helped to smoothen this was first the level of repression is not just increasing. Not when I'm asked, by the way, here by the officials, when I'm asked what happens with the repression in Russia, how they can be compared with the Soviet Union, the first thing we have to understand about the repressions of Russia is that the level of repressions of Russia is not the same. First of all, before 2022 and after 2022, it's completely different methods of suppressing the opponents, the independent journalism, the independent science, the independent opinion, whatever. And then that it's not stable after 2022. It's changed constantly, and it's changing to the worse. Every 3-4 months, the legislation, repressive laws are amended in the way that it becomes more and more dangerous to oppose or to alter some independent or critical opinions. So the level of repressions, the first thing is it's changing, and it's changing for the worse. It's increasing. And it's increasing in a very fast pace. We are talking about the novellas, about amendments of the penal code and practices that are introduced on the almost monthly basis, so several times a year. The new repressive measures are introduced. Then, to return to what we are talking about, besides this pressure from above, there is horizontal pressure. And things are changing in the sense that after having realized that they cannot stop the war by being with their disagreement, or by being not in favor of it publicly, people started to smoothen their position to meet this horizontal pressure, not to be in the constant confrontation and constant split with their environment. And they didn't become supporters of the war, as some like graphs or numbers achieved by simple tools, as Levada does, for instance, can show us. But they are searching for the common ground to overcome this gap, to overcome this social split, and find this common ground in the not praising the war, but exactly what was I said, to praising the resilience of the country, the normality of the country, the fact that the country, despite being in war and despite being under sanctions, is continuing basically to have the same and sometimes better life than before the war. And this is not connected directly to the war, but even those who dare to say it are saying that, okay, the regime maybe will go one day, the war will stop one day, but this remains, this like more cohesive social fabric, more resilient and self-sufficient economy, more industry, more technological self-sufficiency, more technological independence. All these things are good because, well, there is a peaceful competition between the countries around the globe. So we are achieving some result because of the war, on the sidelines of the war, despite of the war, but this is a good thing. And this is common platform for militarists and, let's say, pacifists, for those who support the dictatorship and the invasion, and for those who don't support dictatorship and the invasion, or are somewhere in between. This is the common ground. This is the thing that we can maybe introduce a notion for this. It can be called soft patriotism, so hard patriotism for those who are very supportive of the war itself, confrontation with the West, aggressive NATO, Ukrainian Nazis, all these things we are listening on the daily basis from the Russian propaganda sources. And then this soft patriotism is something that allow people to be, to remain in the country, to remain, to bridge the gap between them and their environment, and basically to remain Russian citizens in some sense, or in some basic sense of the word.
So all of these softly patriotic Russians who are reasonably happy with their life, happy enough with their government, or at least try not to talk about it, coexisting alongside a war. They've been told by their government a few times about the risks of escalation of that war. Are they worried? I mean, if you poll people about their fears, you're painting a picture where people are pretty satisfied with things and don't seem that worried. But is that right? Or are there worries about nuclear war, about a war with the United States, a war with Europe?
Here we have, some diversification, let's say, of opinions according to the groups we are talking of. The fears are different in different groups, and let's put aside the quite normal fears of losing the job, some health and family, and let's go more directly to the politically originated fears, where on the first place will be, maybe like in most of Europe, migration, not the war. Migration that is connected by the idea of terrorism, or with some nationalist ideas, losing the country, being minority, and our kids are a minority in the school classes, because Russia is still, even after the war, continue to import workforce from mostly the Central Asia. Less from Ukraine and Moldova, of course, it was before the war, but still the numbers are big. And then the state narrative, the state propaganda is trying to sort of combine the danger of migration with the dangers of the war, or at least not the migration, but terrorism rooted in people's fear of migration, connecting, as it was basically the news of a day before yesterday, that the Следственный комитет, so investigation committee, have investigated the terrorist attack against concert hall in Russia in 2023, 2024, am I mistaken? 4, yes, 4, in the spring of 2024, during the rock concert when hundreds of people have died. It was similar to Bataclan attack in Paris in 2007, if I'm not mistaken again in the date. No, not 7, 15, sure. That's not that far. And what else? Yes, and they are insisting on the connection between this terrorist attack and the Ukrainians. So there are those who prepared this act of terrorism are connected with, basically, it's ordered by Ukrainian special services, which is strangely accepted by, well, general public opinion, in the sense that everything bad that happens in Russia, with Russia, during the war is somehow connected to the war, but general context of the confrontation with the West. And "На войне à la guerre comme à la guerre" is a response to the people asked, what do you think about this connection, or what do you think about this terrorist attack, this à la guerre comme à la guerre? Of course, something bad will happen because we are in war with Ukraine and with big part of the West. So some bad things can be produced by this situation, and automatically, almost without any reflection, any terrorist attack is framed this way, is put in this context of the war with Ukraine and with the West. So if you watch Russian television, if you follow the Russian news, some of that narrative about who Russia is at war with has shifted a little bit, right? We had many, many years of Russia in public statements, in documents, in its foreign policy strategy, painting a picture of Russia that is constantly under threat from a US-led West, right? That the United States is the problem. The United States tells its NATO allies and any EU member states that might not be in NATO, and any countries that might want to join either one, what to do. They all do what the United States says. The United States tells them to be mean to Russia, so that's why they're mean to Russia. Russia is ready to welcome the countries of the European continent as friends and trading partners again as soon as they break away from the United States. But we have Donald Trump coming back to office and talking a very different talk, and you've got the European countries continuing the narrative they had before, which is that Russia is a threat. We worry about Russia. Russia is our problem. And here you've got, you've got the thing about who's responsible for the inability to negotiate. But I'm also curious to what extent, aside from blaming the Europeans for not getting a deal on Ukraine, do the Russians think they face a threat from Europe? Well, yes and no. It's, again, very ambivalent narrative. What is important about this graph, that it mirrors exactly, well, how the criticism of the United States in official media has dropped after Donald Trump became president and called Putin, and then after the first meeting about Ukraine without Ukraine in Saudi Arabia, and the beginning of talks between foreign ministries of both countries about the normalization of diplomatic ties, reopening the consulates, these sort of things that are not concerning Ukraine directly. And we see that in the first time of history, the main obstacle to the peace is not the United States, which was portrayed, of course, for decades, not for decades, after maybe, well, Putin's disappointment in his connection with the West. and it's directly connected to his decision to stay in power after the logically constitutional end of his presidential time, his two presidential terms. And Europe is now more responsible and more and oftener accused of being source of the war compared to the United States. Trump wants the peace, but Europe is an obstacle and hinders Trump and Putin to achieve the peace, which can change because, and we see the signs in just very recent days, we see the possibility of the change of the behavior of Russian propaganda, of this Russian philo-American and anti-European narrative, because obviously Putin was very offended by Trump's remark and by the rejection by Donald Trump of his offer of mediation between Israel and Iran. It was not just a rejection of mediation after the initially positive reaction, but it was the rejection in the very harsh form. Vladimir, please mediate, well, in your country, mediate between you and Ukraine before you offer some good services in the globe, which is not just offensive in form for the, well, Kremlin's mind, Kremlin's people's mind, but it is going to the opposite direction of the whole idea of reloading, let's say, Russian-American and Russian-Western relations. And the idea is very clear. Without ending the war in Ukraine, to make of the war of Ukraine just a point of the long agenda, of the broad agenda of the relations between Moscow and Washington. In the sense that we are two big powers, we have so many things to discuss, we are globally responsible for things from Arctic and, I don't know, Middle East, climate, trade, with capital letters, trade. And Ukraine is just not in the center of our relations. It's just a point, it can be sidelined, it can be marginalized. It's basically a very local conflict, mostly generated by Europeans and previous American administration. And we can, if to stop it immediately, if not possible, we just can go farther, to turn the page, if not, and go farther. And the Middle East was of big help. Generally, what happens in the Middle East was helping Putin enormously to cover his war with two other wars. And Gaza helped him a lot. And now Iran-Israel strikes, mutual strikes, helped him a lot. And he was trying to offer or to act the way similar to how he acted in the 2015 during the first Donbas war, when he presented the war before this fait accompli of Syrian intervention, when Russian military, Russian air forces out of the sudden were discovered in the Syrian airspace, helping Assad, and Russians have opened a military base in Syria, and then saved, at least for a while, for a long while, have saved the Assad regime. And what was important for the Kremlin at that time, that from the country where the central point of its international agenda was Ukraine, the war in Donbass, the annexation of Crimea, it became a country that is projecting the force globally, and you have to talk to it about Syria, about Middle East, and I remind that the same 2015 is the year of the Iranian nuclear deal, and Russia was a co-sponsor of the nuclear deal. Russia was the main operator of Iranian nuclear fuel, which meant that Russia, after the annexation of the Crimea and after the first Donbas war, so the first invasion basically in Ukraine, return to the global scene as a player, as a participant of a global agenda. And it's exactly the trick that Putin wants to repeat right now, to sideline its war in Ukraine, to sideline the new annexations, and without stopping the hostilities, to go to the global agenda. And President Trump was in the beginning quite listening to this, and we have only in the very recent days the signs that he starts to reject this offer. So this opinion changed. Europe is more hostile and more responsible than the US can change again if the behavior of Russian propaganda change.
I mean, which basically says that if you want to know what the Russian public thinks, just watch Russian television. It will tell you, it's telling the Russian public what to think, so it will tell you what the Russian public thinks.
Well, yes and no, because it's somehow it's really depending on what is said by the TV, by the presenters, by the officials themselves, because the modern dictatorship or personalist dictatorship, and people sometimes are mistaken, even Western tourists, when come to Russia, knowing that Russia is dictatorship, they expect some slogans and some Putin supporters on the streets. It just don't happen because, in the first half of 20th century, we didn't have television, and television is replacing the spotters on the street with more efficiency, because Putin is exactly as TV stars, serial stars, is every day in every home. You don't need portraits on the street. If it's the member of your family, Solovyov is basically a member. Solovyov is a very militant commentator of a very aggressive political talk show, the anchor of a very aggressive political talk show. The aggressiveness of the Russian official or semi-official language right now cannot be imagined if you don't know, don't listen, don't read in Russian. It's something that surpassed the worst days of the maybe Cold War after Stalin. The aggressiveness of the language is Medvedev style. But what you are saying, that's only about the propaganda. It's not only about the propaganda in the sense that the two wars in the Middle East, then the economic pressure from the West, and the military support by the West to Ukraine made many Russians that were initially had very high doubts about the invasion, made them to think, shifted their perspective to the more, not belligerent, but maybe more defensive mood, in the sense that you see how complex is the world, how many contradictions are in the world, how many conflicts exist in the modern world. So the world is not basically a garden or a paradise with peaceful animals, that the world is a jungle with predators, and we have to behave accordingly. And if you ask me about the perception of the threat, during the war it has changed, especially in the elite groups. Even those elite groups who were initially against the war, and it's a considerable part of the elite, or were not asked about the war, like technocrats. The idea is that during this war, Ukraine really becomes and became already a real threat. If before the war in 2021, it was mostly an imagined threat. Well, because if you remember what was said by Ukrainian politicians, that Crimea can be brought back to Ukraine only with negotiations, only with peaceful means somewhere in the future. Donbass was more dubious because about there were ideas about somehow to press Donbass militarily, but basically the pace and the intensity of hostilities was quite low by the 2021. And at that time, the threat was mostly imagined. Now the perception is that Ukraine is a real threat, and you have to somehow to deal with this fact and to, well, whatever, disarm Ukraine, to change the regime, to secure the zones the security zones on Ukrainian territory because of the Kursk invasion or because of drone strikes deep inside Russian territory, or because maybe in the future the well, Germany or other Western countries will deliver the long range missiles. So Ukraine somehow has to be domesticated and defeated as a real threat. That's how the perception of the elite groups has changed, even of those groups who before the war and the beginning of the war were shocked, were not, well, shocked not with the very fact, shocked of not being consulted, and et cetera, et cetera.
So I think I'm going to turn to our erudite audience, which I know is filled with people who have a lot of insights, and there are also online questions asked on the YouTube channel. So I have a few of those, but let's take a person who is in the audience first, and then we'll go to a YouTube question. So I'll take hands. If we don't have any hands, I'll just go straight to the YouTube questions. Okay, YouTube questions it is. Oh, you have, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much. My name is Jacques Boucher. Actually, I'm a philanthropy advisor, but I have a long time interest in Russia. And thank you for the description of the current situation. My question is, well, you described it that on the whole, Russian people tend to be, if not satisfied, they can live with the war and they feel even perhaps more happy than before. But is this not a kind of artificial situation in the sense that, well, they've all received more salaries. So they are richer, and this has been able to succeed for a number of years. But is the situation not slowly but surely coming to an end, whereby the Russian government has spent all its savings, and that at the last economic forum in St. Petersburg, even the Ministry of Economics said that we're entering into uncertain times, even talking about stagflation. So, if you allow me a personal anecdote, long time ago, I was in Cuba in the 80s, and I thought everybody was happy there too. But I didn't realize they were subsidized by the Soviet Union. Once they were not subsidized anymore, there was the economic crisis. And I think you know where I'm getting at. If the economy doesn't work, are the Russians still going to be happy?
Obviously much less compared to now. There are two points to answer. Of course, for instance, civil servants, not to mention military and law and order services, special services, prosecutor offices, police, were repaid very high for their loyalty, I'm sorry, to the regime, and even the level of like mid-range civil servant, local government servants who lost, for instance, their possibility to travel freely. It's forbidden for most of them, all to leave the country at all, or to go to unfriendly countries. So the exceptions are maybe Turkey and Vietnam, these places, when China, if somebody wants. They are repaid with the considerable increase of the salaries. But this new mood, then of course we are going to the military-industrial complex beneficiaries which the current companies connected to Rostech, the main industrial, well, umbrella company, umbrella holding. Of course, these companies and those who work in them are paid small cities. When you see the building of houses, it has rocketed, and it's families of soldiers or families of workers of military industrial complex. But of course, because the war has absorbed so much manpower, we see the big increase of salaries since, let's say, traditional male professions like the drivers of trucks, who are now earning the money comparable to the soldiers on the front line. And you have a perfect choice to go to the peaceful profession in the heavy industry, or to drive a truck, or to go to the front line, earning already not that much different money. Of course, inflation is one consequence. The somehow emptying of financial reserves is another consequence, but generally the money is very central for this war, and I always remind that it's the first medieval war of modernity, because before that Russia and the Soviet Union fought wars, but it never fought, in the recent 2-3 centuries, never fought wars with recruited soldiers, with paid soldiers. Although the very word soldiers, soldato, for those who receive soldi, quindi that means the money, so it's paid fighter. But in Russian history, it's the first paid war. The real soldati, so real soldiers, which is a medieval practice when the Italian city-states were fighting against each other, and the citizens were traders and merchants and bankers, and they didn't want, of course, to fight. They recruited armies. So the first war, Russia is fighting with an almost completely recruited army, and the money is very central for this. And the money is very central for keeping calm the social, not unrest, but social discontent, including the families of those who have been killed. And when Putin translates these terrible meetings with widows or mothers of the killed officers or soldiers, and they are looking perfectly, not happy, but somehow satisfied, and saying thank you, Vladimir Vladimirovich, it means that basically they have been bought. And there is a very, if you want to understand, if you read in Russian, but it's translated already, a very good book by Katerina Gordeeva, who's a Russian interior, a prominent Russian interior, maybe second in numbers, a few years after Yuri Dudь, but a very different style. And she had the interviews with the Russian deserters, with the families of deserters, with the families of the killed soldiers. And it's very interesting material by itself. But what we can learn, asking, for instance, what happens to these unhappy mothers, unhappy widows after, they are basically satisfied and silenced by privileges, by payments, and by the heroization of their families, making of them the families of heroes, with social lifts offered to their kids, like studying for free in good universities, going to the capitals and so on. But the second point is that not only those who are rewarded materially have a little bit changed from the total rejection of the present wartime situation to somehow being adopted to it and to be with less confrontational relations, less confrontational relations with the rest of the society, is well, not everybody of them is rewarded materially. And I'm following several groups, several chats, several closed groups, which is not sociologically accurate evidence, but still it's evidence. I follow these groups from the very beginning of the war with total, anger and shock and rejection of the war and the regime that started the war, to ignoring the war and starting to talk to everyday things, how we meet, and about professional things, about family things. And there's younger people who are not supportive of dictatorships, who are not supportive of, these narratives of traditional values, but they are not rewarded materially. They are highly placed highly enough to be rewarded. They're just starting their lives. Till the rejection of maybe Zelensky as one of the culpables in the fact that the war continues. And if you go back to these graphs, and who is responsible for the continuation of the war, and Ukraine is the main, and then Europe, and then the US, and the least is Russia, is not only the number given by the supporters of the war, it's the number given by the people who are against the war and are like sort of angry why they still resist and stop and don't allow us to stop the war. Yeah.
So, one of the questions from the YouTube folks. I think it's an interesting question. How do you square the story about acceptant Russians and Russians who accept the world as it is with the protests that you do see in Altai, in Bashkortostan? What's going on there? Are there parts of Russia that the happiness doesn't reach?
Well, it's very important. I know that a lot of hopes were placed in these local protests, and really Russia was not, calm in the sense of North Korea or some even before the war. The local protests is very known phenomena. Even the regimes harsher than Russian. Look at China. China has a lot of non-political protests. And after the initial shock of the transition of the Russian regime to the modus operandi of full-scale dictatorship in the sense of repressions, and in the sense of silencing any opposition, both the civil society, some horizontal civil society, and local protests have returned. With the only difference that they are not. People don't protest directly against the war. This is momentaneously stopped and punished. But then the people have realized that to do something else is generally not impossible, in the sense that you go to bury Navalny in thousands and dozens of thousands, and it's not the consequence is not the immediate punishment. So maybe you will be noticed by some special service people, but it's not immediately punished as the anti-war protest or some pro-Ukrainian activity or pro-Western activity. The Altai is a very characteristic case because this protest in the Altai is basically, in the Altai Republic, is basically very anti-colonial in the sense that many regions have governed by the appointees who don't have any connection to this region. It's not only ethnic republics, but just normal, let's say Russian regions. For instance, my native town of Yaroslavl, which is a major region, 300 kilometers from Moscow, a historic place, so UNESCO heritage city center, is for the second time is run by an appointee from Moscow, which brings money from Moscow, people from Moscow, elite from Moscow, sidelining the local elite. And in the beginning, there were like contradictions and conflict, and the attempts to resist somehow. But it was both suppressed and bought by money brought from Moscow. Now Altai, in the Altai Republic, because Altai, there are two regions with this name. One is basically Russian region and flat plains, grain plains, and another is mountainous region, and it's populated 50-50 by the local community called Altai with their own language. There are some around 200,000 people in general, and Russians. They are, and the newly appointed governor of the republic, head of the republic, has nothing to do with this region, nothing to do with this community, with this nation, small nation. But what he's doing, he is promoting the land owning by, well, Moscow interests, Russian interests in the republic, which is basically the local communities have considered that this land is to them, for their horses, for their herds, for their ships. And they find more and more difficulty to have access to the land, because Altai became one of the first destinations for the domestic tourism. Russia has not a lot of mountains. This is mountains, beautiful, some, I mean, with, you know, some mythology, a legendary place. Putin is going there. There are rumors that he has another palace there, and the locals can show you that is the road to Putin's palace. So the Moscovites, the Russian interests, Russian companies, Sberbank, are increasingly going there and building hotels and building and buying or renting land for their own interests, and the locals have started to feel sidelined. Besides this, many locals are fighting in the war, and the mood in the local families is very much different. From one side, you see this official heroization. From the other side, you see the understanding that sometimes, well, the people are cheated and not receiving the money they were promised, and many mobilized are fighting, not only contractor soldiers. And the general mood is that we want the war to stop as soon as possible, and this is exactly what we see in this graph, which is not, of course, very, but this is dark blue, this is light blue, and it gives together 45% of the people saying that they support the peace talks with Ukraine. So 64% of Russian citizens support the peace talks as a way to the peace, to the ceasefire. But then the contradiction is that about the same amount of people, when asked how this ceasefire has to begin, without any precondition, or after the elimination of the roots of the conflict, they answer, of course, after the elimination of the roots of the conflict. And this roots of the conflict notion is very, like, propaganda invented and constantly repeated by the state officials, by Putin himself. Lavrov and Peskov both love very much this notion of первопричины конфликта, so primordial roots of the conflict. And returning to the Altai question and Bashkortostan question, which is very close in this sense, you see that it's the same sort of contradiction. They are dissatisfied with their relations with Moscow. They are dissatisfied with how they run from Moscow and by Moscow, but it's not this dissatisfaction is not converted immediately in the rejection of the war. They are dissatisfied by the Moscow, but they continue to fight, not just continue to fight them, basically a war initiated by Moscow and from Moscow, but they don't connect these two things. They are dissatisfied not with the war, but well, this land situation, municipal reform, because in Altai they are eliminating the lowest level of self-government in the village level, which is important for the locals because they are living in villages. So these two facts are yet disconnected in the majority of the minds.
So very sadly, I think we are out of time. We started a little bit late, and now we've gone a little bit late. But there is a reception, I think right out here, right out there. So you'll have the opportunity to ask additional questions. And please, in the meantime, join me in thanking Alexander.
Thank you.